Bada bing.
What up, punks? Welcome back to another episode of the Pop Culture Punks podcast. I'm your host, Phil, and across from me is your boy,
Josh.
This week, we are here to discuss the movie Hacksaw Ridge.
Yes, we are.
Sort of in honor of July 4th and celebrating Independence Day, we wanted to take a look at a war film. I don't know exactly how those two things relate, but it's about
The
freedom
journey,
and all that,
journey
all
of
that
the American
stuff.
story, I guess.
And we wanted to look at a more unconventional war film that came out recently. And we thought Hacksaw Ridge was the perfect choice because neither of us had seen it, and this was an excuse to watch it.
Yes.
So.
I've literally had it. I unwrapped it today. Like, I've had it from a Black Friday.
Had it?
Yeah,
okay.
From Black Friday from like years ago.
It came out.
Ago.
It dropped in 2016.
Yep.
So it's been 3 years now.
It's been a long time.
Doesn't seem like it's been that long.
No, it doesn't. That's the crazy thing.
Yeah.
But it was like, it's about time I should watch this movie.
Yeah. So
kind of worked out.
We're excited about that.
Definitely.
Today is probably going to be one of our more rambly episodes, I would say.
I would agree, yeah.
Hopefully not rambly in the sense that it's incoherent, but more...
There's going to be a lot of processing.
We're fresh off watching it. I watched it last night.
And I literally watched it like 20 minutes ago.
And he just finished it. And so this one, hopefully our thoughts are in order, but it's going to be sort of one where we kind of piece through it together and come to a conclusion maybe. Like we're still at the point where we don't exactly know how to feel about it maybe.
Yep.
At least I don't.
I think I do.
I have certain thoughts about it,
sure,
but there's some things about it that I want to like piece through, and I'm interested in your thoughts
definitely.
on it. So
for sure. And also note before we forget, we had mentioned, and so the context is, as kind of Phil did mention just now, that it's kind of looking at this through the lens of storytelling in an like a very, I don't want to say a tired medium, but it's like every other Call of Duty game. Like the most recent Battlefield was World War II themed. Like Call of Duty went back to World War II a couple years ago. It's a very saturated genre.
Yeah, the war genre is very saturated.
Specifically
like
World War II
itself.
Yeah, basically. And so our intention was to look at something that is in the World War II sphere, specifically why we picked Hacksaw Ridge. And the reason maybe why not Private Ryan, which this is like a pop culture blasphemy, but I've not seen that movie. I don't know if I want to watch it after I've watched this one, to be honest, but
it's a good movie too.
But this is a story of a singular man who actually was a real person, Desmond Doss, who actually won the Congressional Medal of Honor for being a cooperative conscientious objector. I was like,
first conscientious objector to win the Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
There's only 3. And he's the only one who was living to receive it.
Yeah.
So
it's a crazy, based on a real story. So this isn't entirely fiction, but I think there's going to be a mix of like some very heartfelt discussion of just like a lot of emotions that I had. There's going to be some discussion of the time and the era, like how pop culture deals with really serious stuff like this. I think it's going to be a very wide range of the breadth of this topic, but
it'll
it's
be hard to separate the medium and the storytelling from like the messaging.
Yes.
Because I don't want to dive too much into like war commentary and stuff, but we're probably going to end up going there anyway, just because that's what the movie's about. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion
for sure.
But before we get into that, as we've said the last couple of weeks, we have a website called popculturepunks.com. It has everything you could need to know about the podcast. You can get all the links to the shows up there. You can click on the merch tab to check out our merch from Threadless and Redbubble. We started doing some writing.
Yep.
The first blog post went up last Friday from Josh, and we're going to be doing sort of the pop culture recommendations. It kind of depends week to week, maybe what we're feeling, but it'll be kind of in that vein. So we'll be doing pop culture recs, some storytelling and different things. So check that out on the website. We'll be probably putting up one a week. I think that's our goal.
Yeah, so we'll be alternating, and they're kind of in the style of, there's the Vlog Brothers on YouTube, so it's kind of reminiscent of that style where it's me speaking as myself, obviously writing to Phil as a recommendation, and so our hope is to potentially get creative with other people who can contribute and stuff like that.
Yeah, so you can check that out on the website.
That's where you can check that out.
Is there anything else on there that I'm forgetting?
I think just another call out to the Katana Zero Let's Plays that we did. Yeah, those are already out. Those came out last week. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
so those are out. So we've got The Rage 2 Part 1 and Part 2 and Katana Zero Part 1 and Part 2 on the YouTube channel. and the very first Pop Culture Rex blog post, which will be the new format as of right now, until maybe our schedules clear up in a crazy way. But
summer's busy.
Yeah, so
busier than you think.
Life is busy. So that's, I would get used to reading it in that format, and they're relatively short. I think mine was relatively.
Yours was like a page.
It was like a page.
Mine's
so.
like 2 pages, single space. So
as long as
once
it's
you review it, maybe it'll be a little shorter. But
so there's way too much in
here.
So it's all good. All right, man.
Yeah, we're excited about that.
Any other updates? I think that's it.
I think that's everything.
All right, cool beans.
So jumping into things, I'm curious. Is there any war films that you've seen before this? Like, is that your thing? Had you ever?
That's
seen
a good question.
Up,
so
what's your context coming into this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that's an interesting question because I don't think I've actually thought about it, and I think when I look at my taste and the stuff that I tend to gravitate towards and watch and movies and books I read and things like that, I very strongly steer clear of things that are based in the real world, if that makes sense. Not that I don't read, John Wick I love, but John Wick's world is not.
It's not our world.
It's not
really.
our world. Yeah. Whereas I think my love of fiction and storytelling, I think for me personally, it's because I can exist or live or spend time with characters and stuff that doesn't exist or is kind of manipulated based on things that we understand, and so I tend to gravitate towards things that I'm like, this obviously for very obvious reasons doesn't exist and it never will, and so it's fun to see what it's like versus things that do exist or already happen. That's why I don't like sitcoms or rom-coms, because it's like I don't want to watch a bunch of people have relationship issues, or like I don't want to watch, like I want to watch some cyborg sci-fi guy like clean up crime and something, or like things like that, where it's just personally it's more interesting. In terms of other war movies I've seen, I honestly don't think I could name one. I think if you threw out a list, like maybe I'd be like, oh, I've seen that, but like I know the big tuna is Saving Private Ryan, and I honestly haven't seen that. There's so many times in high school I was supposed to watch it, or I was like, oh, I'm gonna finally sit down and watch this, but kind of like I said, it's not a genre that I go out of my way to spend time with, which I'm actually excited that we did watch this because I'm super stoked on this movie. But I think if it wasn't for this podcast episode, I don't think I would have gone out of my way to watch Hacksaw Ridge, or I don't think I'm going to go out of my way in the future to see Saving Private Ryan or
it's kind of interesting because I had seen things about this movie and heard about it and was like, that sounds kind of interesting, but for some reason I just never watched it.
Sure.
And it's not like I'm disinterested in war films.
Yeah.
Because I've seen like the classics like Full Metal Jacket and Saving Private Ryan and a couple other ones. And like I enjoy war films just because of like the heroism and kind of attempting to portray war as gruesome as it is, and kind of like it's just an interesting genre that tries to show like the atrocities, and sometimes it's violent and sometimes it kind of revels in war and makes you feel uncomfortable a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
But for some reason at this stage in my life, I'm just like not as interested in that kind of stuff. But every time I end up watching one, I'm like, wow, that was really interesting and really good. So it's kind of it's an interesting genre that I feel like has been so, like you said before, so saturated lately that it's just kind of, I've become numb to it in some ways.
Right.
It's just
exactly.
It's just another World War II story. Like it's interesting. Like I'm sure I'll enjoy it if I watch it, but it's kind of just like there's other things I want to watch and
exactly.
enjoy. And I'm similar to you where I like the escapist aspect of like fantasy and sci-fi and different things where it's like there are commentaries and there are things going on in these stories, but like they're not as overt. So if you want to kind of get that escapist feel, then you don't have to engage with it. Whereas like you watching a war film, like you're getting it head on. This is like straight up like social commentary, war, whatever.
For sure.
And so it's a different world to step into, because in some ways war films are in our world, but in some ways it's like when you're watching it, you're like in a world that you've never experienced. Like it's like it's real, but it's also like fantasy, because like this is the sort of thing I'm never gonna know this. I'm never gonna experience this. And so like in some ways it's like it doesn't feel real because it's just so out of this world that you're just like, what in the, this is insane. And then like it pulls you into the mindset of how crazy like these soldiers must have felt in this time. And they really go into it in this movie.
To be honest, that was I I cried, being blunt, I cried twice during this movie. And one of the times was when they first, I mean, I was super emotional during this whole movie. And I think because there were so many layers going into it that I think if I would have been in high school, I mean, this came out in 2016. So it was fairly recent. So we would have been in college, and like, I think at a time in life where I just sort of seen it as like, wow, that was super violent and like kind of a cool story. But I think there's just been different life changes and getting married and seeing the violence of the world and having a different perspective on like why people do things and, you know, the human heart and all that stuff that I think watching this movie now like tore me up. And I think one of the big things was that opening scene where they're at the top of Hacksaw Ridge and they're like all grouped up and they go out and just the chaos that explodes and see, you know, like even there's the guy like down below and he's like, you know, to the other guys that are coming in fresh who are main characters that were Doss's superiors, they're asking one of the other guys who's just up there, hey, you know, where are these bunkers, blah blah blah, and he says like 2 words and he like throws up, spits it out, and then comes back and he's just like doing it, and you're just like, I can't imagine how emotionally devastating and just psychological, like, you know, people like PTSD is always something that is talked about with soldiers and stuff, and I think we write it off in a lot of ways as people who don't deal with it, not even as just a psychological issue, but the cause of that psychological issue, specifically like war and PTSD. And I think with this movie, it was just, and I'm sure the same effect with Saving Private Ryan, but just looking and experiencing through the eyes of guys who are probably our age, maybe even a little younger, having
with
to,
the same like level of innocence. Yeah,
exactly. And just kind of like, all right, you know, we're signing up for war, we're doing this thing, like, okay, it's like tense and there's guns, and then a guy next to him gets their head blown through, and the guy over there steps on a mine, and it's just like how in 2 seconds they went from like focused and direct to just like watching guys die next to them and like not knowing what to do.
It's that contrast between like the amount of training that they had to do to get to this point,
right,
and then the level it ramps up to is like, no matter how much training they went through, like they were not prepared for what they were getting into.
Yeah, exactly.
And like they're all people our age or even younger than us, like 18, 20-year-old kids basically, who are thrust into this insanity.
Fight for your country, you know, stand up against this evil power that's trying to ruin the world and all this stuff, and it's a big thing. And I think that was like one of the themes that ran through it that I think really resonated with me on a super deep level, was the desire to fight for something. And I feel like that was one of the cool things that this movie did really well, was actually getting you into the mind of these guys who are there. Like, it wasn't just a like the way they portrayed Desmond Doss and the way that they did his story, they didn't portray it as, you know, oh, there's this idealist pansy who's kind of coming into the, and obviously that's not his story, so that wouldn't be true if they had told it that way. But I think all the guys there are upset, and you just, it's like, it's all human. Like, this isn't a fake story because all the emotions are human. We can't trust you because you're not carrying a gun. I literally don't trust you. And I know guys who have gotten their faces blown off, and I don't want to be him because you, the one guy in our platoon, won't carry a gun. And so you're kind of like, can't argue with that logic. But then you have Doss's side, and I know us coming from like a Christian perspective, it's like I could see that. I don't think that would be my personal conviction, but I could see someone who is so convinced of like, I need to be here and serve my country and sit and be a support for these men, but I'm not going to do it this way. And the hell he paid for that. And then on top of that, sticking through not even just the safe side, you know, like how safe it was to put up that fight and to not carry a gun and to choose and to live by that conviction, to then go and 75 times pray, God, give me one more. God, give me one more. And just get 75 freaking dudes, one of which who was the commander's that was harassing him. And the poetic irony, and yet like the beauty in that whole scene of this one guy who everyone was like, F this guy, he sucks, we're all gonna die, and he's the one who's like bringing all these dudes, you know, and just and oh my gosh, the second time I like got real choked up was at the end when they're actually showing clips of all of them, and his commander's on there, and he's saying, and he's like, you can see like tears in his eyes,
up,
and he's like, man, he's like, and that's the irony of it all, is this little pipsqueak went on to save my life. And it's just like, holy frick. And this all happened. Like, that's the thing too that is undergirding this entire film is like this all happened. And obviously it's fictional and it's fantastical.
Yeah, there's certain parts that they.
But to a certain extent, it's like.
But he actually saved 75 people's lives.
Right, but the violence, but the 75 men that he ran out to the battlefield and dragged to the, could you imagine the heart, like, I was reading some of his other bios and other people describing his story and him being so close to the Japanese enemy line that he could hear them whispering. Like, I can't imagine that. Like, there's not, it's not like, oh, I hid from the cops once and I'm like, oh, I almost got in trouble. It's like, there's people on the other side of this dirt pile that if they find out I'm alive are going to put a bullet in me, they're going to stab me, they're going to murder me.
Well, and I think that's why I found the movie interesting, because it's about this guy who has this really strong conviction for something that you're just like, it's kind of hypocritical, or it's like it's kind of like this weird, he like drew this weird line in the sand and everybody's like, why won't you just hold a rifle? Like, why won't you just do the training? Why won't you do this? And he's like, I just can't, because if I abandon my principles, I don't know how I'll be able to live. And when he's like arguing with all these people, you're like, just take the rifle, pick up the rifle, whatever. But then that same conviction is what basically got him to save 75 people's lives. So it's and it's interesting at the end when like the rest of his platoon is like, he's basically like, I know tomorrow's your Sabbath, but like these guys are motivated by your motivation to like save all these people, like, and they won't go up there without you. Like they need you. Yeah. They need you there to motivate them, and then that motivation is what actually got them to take over and win
and to get
Hacksaw Ridge after all this time.
Right.
And it's interesting how, like, the contrast between the beginning and the end of kind of his military time in the movie is kind of drawing the distinction between like the convictions that he had. Like, the same conviction that was causing him so much trouble is the conviction that basically got him. I mean, it's not the same exact conviction, but it's
the same source. The
ideals,
the consistency of
basically, it. Like, that gave him the strength to continue to save these people, because he's not there to kill people. The only thing he's there to do is save. Like, all he can do. There's that scene when he's at the top and he's like praying and he's like, I don't know what I'm here for. I don't know what to do. And he hears the guy calling,
like, one guy,
help me.
Medic.
And he's like, all right, I guess this is what I'm doing. And then you just get this amazing sequence of him saving people,
one guy after the next, and like having to dive into this thing, and again, obviously it's like any sort of inaccuracy aside of the actual story, but just the tale of him and just watching and just the knowing, I think it was almost the fact that like knowing that he made it out alive, and again, like that this wasn't a fictional movie, that I'm like, oh, is he gonna die?
Yeah,
it made it so much more powerful in that, like, at any point this guy was well within his own right to say, I'm done. Like, my guys have pulled out. I saved 15 dudes. I think that's a good amount. But he didn't stop. And I think that was the level of, exactly like you said, it wasn't, it's like, yes, it's a silly conviction, especially when you're choosing to do this. But the fact that I think and it speaks to a testament of, and I'm speaking as if it's like, again, fictional, but it speaks as a testament to Desmond Doss and his character, that he wasn't, his life wasn't him telling all these people like, no, you shouldn't carry guns and you shouldn't do this. But he's like, but I'm not going to do this because I need to do this. And because he stuck through and stuck to that was the thing that ended up, exactly like you said, being the fire at the top of that hill when there's guys dying and he's trying to rescue all these people. Give me one more. And just back. And I can't imagine that. Like, the physical fatigue, the emotional fatigue, the spiritual fatigue, like everything in that. And if you're truly being an empathetic person watching this movie, like really engrossing yourself in like, what is this guy feeling? Like, if not even just movie version of like, oh man, this is crazy, but like Desmond Doss, World War II, Hacksaw Ridge, fighting against the Japanese, like, what is that guy feeling? What is he thinking? What is he doing? This is a madman, and he survives it all. And it's just like, holy crap! Anyway.
Yeah, and I think the movie does a really good job at kind of bringing you along with him, because there's so many moments where you feel the fatigue and the anxiety, and there's that one scene where he's in the trench with Smitty.
Smitty. Yep.
And that was one scene where I almost started crying. Like, when he said,
telling the story of like why
telling
he's not
the story about it,
and
then Smitty kind of saying like, I I'm not going to give you my gun because you're nuts, man. But then like that little smile that they both have.
That they're joking
like,
around.
They're in the middle of war, but they're still able to kind of like enjoy each other's company and just basically people coming around to understanding his convictions and seeing the value that he has. But that the scene where he falls asleep and he has that dream or whatever, and like my heart just jumped hard, like, and in the same moment, and like there's just all these little moments where you're brought into the scene with him and kind of feeling the same anxieties that he felt was just interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious from a non-story perspective, so from like a movie perspective.
Sure.
Because if this story wasn't true, if this was just a fictional story,
sure,
I don't think I would enjoy it as much.
I agree.
I think there's some storytelling aspects to it, or like I think from a movie perspective, there's some things about it that kind of rubbed me the wrong way or like felt a little bit weird.
Sure.
And if it wasn't a true story, I'd be like, this doesn't make sense.
Do you want to dive into those? Because I have some thoughts on that, and I think
so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, are there anything aside from like the fact that it's an actual true story? Is there anything about the movie itself that kind of you didn't feel was up to par?
Honestly,
changed?
To be honest, I think from that perspective, like I really enjoyed it, and I think, and again, I feel like ever since, it was funny because we just were talking and joking about Derek making fun of murder mystery or whatever on Netflix with like the Adam Sandler movie, and Gloria and I just watched that the other night, and I that would have been a movie that not even like a year ago, like I probably would have been, this is stupid, I don't want to watch this. But I chose and I willingly had a fun time, and I enjoyed it, and it was good, and it wasn't the greatest comedy I've ever seen. I'm not gonna tell everyone and their mom that they need to watch it and they're missing out if they haven't seen it. But it was like, but as a moment for my wife and I to bond over a silly Adam Sandler, Jennifer Aniston movie, it was a great ride. And so I think for this movie, it being a fictional retelling of a true man's story who actually went through everything in this film, obviously to different degrees of like camera angles and like build-ups and drama and whatever, like this actually happened. And so I think from that perspective, that was always undergirding my entire thought, is it's like I understand that I'm watching someone make this person's story, and so because of that, I don't think I was ever ripped out, or there wasn't anything that like set wrong with me. Because I mean, an easy example is it's like, oh, the romance scene, like when he first meets Dorothy and like, all that stuff. It's like, yeah, you could get, depending on how you feel about romance stuff. It's like, for me, I understand this is setting up some stakes. It's also telling a part of his life that exists. And literally it was bracketed, I think almost literally 50-50, where it's half life before the army, training in the army, and then the second half is Hacksaw Ridge.
Yeah, I think for me, it felt like the pacing was off in some parts.
Sure. Do you have specific markers?
Yeah. I feel like the war part felt shorter than it should have been, in a sense. Like by the time.
Okay, I could see that.
I don't know enough about filmmaking. I just know how I felt when I was watching it. I think they focused too much on his adversarial relationship with the military, which, if he was alive, I think from what I read online, it sounds like he never viewed his struggle with the military in the way that they portrayed it in the film. Kind of like the whole like court-martial thing never happened in real life. Like they just added that to add like dramatic effect, kind of. Right. Almost like it felt like they were trying to build this weird adversarial thing, so it looked like his accomplishments were more than they needed to be, instead of just kind of showing like this dude saved 75 people's lives, like in it not needing to be like, haha, he overcame like the United States military. I think that's like this unnecessary thing.
Yeah.
And I think some of the scenes like where he's actually like saving people, some of that I like started laughing because it just seemed like somebody online described it as like the Japanese were basically just like horror movie villains. Like there was no humanity to them. It was kind of just like he's hiding behind this thing, and then it felt like realistic scenarios, but the way that they portrayed them was almost like comedic to me in a sense, because it was like, this just seems like something that would be in like a horror movie or something. Like I don't know. It like just the way they cut it or something, like the pacing felt a little bit weird.
So you're almost grappling with the unrealistic portrayals of a real event in a way.
Maybe. Like, yeah, I think the story itself is inspiring to me, and the fact that this dude somehow saved 75 people and didn't die is just insane to me. But the movie itself felt a little bit weird. Or like,
okay, yeah.
I feel like they dwelled a lot on a lot of like the horrific stuff in the war, almost to like a revelatory sense, which to me felt tone-wise differently than like the message they were trying to, like the message that his story
I would
portrayed.
Disagree. Yeah. Okay, go for it.
You know what I mean?
We're just throwing that out there, but yeah.
Yeah, so like,
sure.
Because his whole story is about like being against like killing people, but the way that, because Mel Gibson was the director of this, I think, the way that he frames like the violence and stuff in war, almost, and this is just the way I felt. It felt like he was lingering a little bit too much on, almost like it was this weird contrast between like this guy who's his goal is to save people, but then like lingering a little bit too much and kind of like reveling in war.
So what do you think the effect of doing that is with that character specifically?
I mean, I can see what they're trying to do,
which is
contrast the way that his what his character has to deal with in that he's saving this many people, and this is the kind of atrocities he had to experience. But my thing is, it felt like they were lingering too much, like the blood and the guts in the war was like, I don't know.
Was it just that you were like, unsettled and you just like didn't like that, or was it actually like? Here,
I mean,
here's
personally,
my caveat.
I think that's good in a war film. I think it portrays it in an accurate way, probably in a sense. Sure. But it felt weird because it was just contrasted with the message that he kind of lived for in a sense, like his convictions. Like the director and the person the story was about, it felt like had two different views on war. Kind of. And it was like
what were those? Like what were those two different convictions?
So the Desmond Doss or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it seemed like he saw war as a necessary evil in a sense, but his conviction also said like thou shalt not kill, like to the extent where he wouldn't even pick up a rifle. And somehow he still saw a need to go to war and like save people. But then the director, Mel Gibson or whatever, the way that he framed the war felt like he was kind of, I don't know, it's hard to explain.
Glorifying
the violence.
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It just, to me, it felt like those were conflicting worldviews.
See, I actually very much disagree. I think specifically because of the effect. So here's a caveat. Let's say there's not a single drop of blood in the whole movie. Let's say like the worst thing that a guy has is, and I mean, I'm being very, very hyperbolic, so it's not meant to make light, but more to like, if this is maybe more on the other end of the spectrum of hyperviolence, if we went the complete other side, the film effect of, you know, like a guy like laying on the ground, like holding his arm, being like, I've been shot, and him like running in and being like, I'll save you, and he like grabs him, like takes him out, and all this stuff. It's kind of weak. Like it's and not even of just like one, that's not how it would have looked, but I think two, like part of the, and I think I'm also speaking from, I think this is hard because there is a subjectivity to the different level. Like I think for me, the violence pulled me into the very real stakes that this guy had to deal with. Like he was probably stumbling over dead bodies, and he was probably stumbling over, you know, guys that he had literally just known who had their faces blown off and were burned to a crisp. And like because he is the antithesis, I think that was to me like the poetic life that this guy lived, is he was the antithesis of that world that he was thrust into.
I think that's the hard part I'm trying to parse is I didn't feel like I had a problem with the level of violence, because I know that it was a realistic portrayal of the war, and I know that the contrast there is important for showing like the level of crap that he had to deal with in this war. It's more how the director chooses to linger on the violence itself that felt weird to me. So it's not like the hyper violence. Like I don't care about hyper violence like Tarantino. Like blood and guts. I think that's realistic for a wartime setting. I think it's somehow, I don't know enough about like technicalities and stuff, but just the way it lingered sometimes on like war scenes and
I just think
the way it lingered on like stuff. I don't know.
I think it's also interesting though that you said that one of your gripes was feeling, well, maybe not gripes, but one of the things that you felt was that they didn't spend enough time in the war, like on the war side, was what you said earlier.
What I meant by that was enough time building up the like. I didn't feel like him and his troop had enough time, because if you actually read his history and stuff, like
it was
he was in Guam and he was
he
was in the military for 4 years. They made it seem like he was in it for like
a day,
couple weeks.
Like right.
Like they were only on Hacksaw Ridge for a day. It seemed like. So that's what I meant. More like building up that like sense of like camaraderie and kind of like having more scenes where like him not having a gun is a bad thing. Like they only showed one scene where like him not having a gun almost got this other guy killed. I would have liked to see more of that tension almost. And maybe that never happened.
Yeah,
maybe that wasn't a part of the story.
Right, and
but I feel like that probably did happen a lot.
Yeah.
And I would have liked to see more of that tension built into, rather than just like, it kind of felt like they were just getting to the main crux of the story is him being on the cliff, and you know what I mean?
As a specific
so it's not necessarily
I think that's a really good point.
The war stuff itself, it's more like the complexities of
different,
war and
different
camaraderie
pieces
and
of
like
realism.
More character interactions, because like the only person he really reconciled with was the Smitty dude, and then everybody else it was kind of like he kind of did, but you never got those intimate personal moments that I feel like he probably did in real life, because I don't know, it seemed weird. But that's kind of what I meant by that.
No, I think from that perspective that makes a lot of sense, because I think I was trying to rectify how it's like, okay, it's a war film, and I think the violence actually grounds us in how horrifying this guy who's, you know, more or less a pacifist is, and he has to wrestle with all this stuff. But I think specifically from a character development and a storytelling aspect, that could have been something to maybe fictionalize, which is like, what were conversations that he had on the battlefield with guys. You know, like I think even little moments like when he's saving Vince Vaughn's character, like the sergeant, like for him to be like it's all business, which again, we don't know. Like we're speaking as like fiction fans. So for us, it's like, that's a moment to put in where he says, oh, isn't it ironic that you're the one telling me this, or you're the one saving me?
Yeah.
You know, like,
and I get the sense that most of those conversations were actually like things that happened, and maybe they had a limited repertoire of like actual stories.
And to be honest, I wonder if part of and I think this is the thing where I just tried to suspend all disbelief, is mainly because this is a actual work, and because it looked like, based on that ending clip where Desmond Doss was describing pouring the water in that guy's eyes, and that they actually had that scene in the movie. I wonder if their goal was not necessarily to like, oh, like let's build in like fictional moments to like build story and build character and build Desmond and have all these realistic portrayals of like what it's like, but they actually pulled from things that they told, and they just weaved as much of those together to give them a good 40 minutes of like,
and that's kind of what I meant before
stuff.
Of like, if this wasn't a true story, I don't know if I would have liked the movie. I
100%
I don't
agree.
think, like, in my mind, like, because it was a true story, I was willing to suspend it and see it for what it was. But I think if it wasn't true, like, the pacing and different ways they framed certain things felt off to me.
I agree.
And those things still stood out to me, but I was willing to say, like, they're just trying to, like, get this guy's story across, and I'm inspired by what this dude was able to do and stand in the face of, and, like, save 75 to 100 people and get the Medal of Honor and stuff. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
And I think because it's real, I was willing to put away, or even like some of the beginning parts, like his life before the war, like some of that stuff, like just, I don't know what it was, but it almost felt like the Lord of the Rings, the way that it was lighted and stuff. Like it felt really
very
fantastical
bright
and bright.
Yeah.
Like in a weird way, like they were intentionally trying to like create contrast between these two.
Sure, which
things,
I'm sure they were. Yeah.
Which in some ways, like there's a lot of things that just felt off to me about the movie. But because it's true, I was trying to focus on just like his story and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's a weird. I think these types of movies are like hard to grapple with, because like what is the important part here? Is the important part that this guy's story is told faithfully? Because I saw on Wikipedia or something that he didn't. People have been trying to get the rights to his story for a long time, and like he didn't want to do it because his only stipulation was like you can't change anything, basically, and nobody was willing to.
And so that's where I wonder if Mel Gibson with this portrayal was like done, like that's okay.
And it sounds like they did change some things, but I think his son said like a lot of it is just superficial. That was just for
film stuff. Like you just have to
for a film, you
need to.
People's lives aren't often as interesting,
right?
Even though although they said they left some things out, that they didn't think people would believe. Like, apparently in real life, he got sniped in the elbow.
Yeah,
and
that's
like
what
shattered
I heard.
it.
Yeah,
and he crawled like 300 yards or something.
Right.
And they left it out because they didn't think people would believe it.
But I mean, but that's
I'm like,
an interesting...
but people believed that he saved 75 people.
But I think that's interesting because you were also just critiquing that. You were like almost laughing sometimes at the situations that he was in. But it's like, but there's a hard part of like, and I think that's the thing that blew my mind about this movie was like, I almost don't know what is too fantastical, and I almost don't know what is just silly Hollywood portrayal of war, because if this, like, can you freaking imagine having your elbow blown out of your arm by a sniper crawling 300 yards? Like, what? Like, that's bananas. I can't get out of bed in the morning, like, let alone do something like that to save other people's lives and my own life. And so I think there's a level of balance that we have to have, because, like, I think to jump back one quick second, I 100% agree that if this was a fictional movie that someone just came up with to put in this setting, I would not have liked it. And I think mainly because, one, in favor of how they made it, they would have had to completely redo it, and I don't think they would have told the same story the same way, because they would have been like, you know, those guys who beat him in the thing would have been like the guys he saved, and there would have been moments of like them thanking him, and there would have been more direct, like, actual story resolve. Almost like story circle caricature,
and I think that's why it felt off, because it's real. It's like other movies I've seen, like Moneyball or different things where like the ending isn't quite the storybook ending because it's real life, and I think that's how the movie felt sometimes. But I think that's because it was a real story, and real life often doesn't have the same resolve that you expect in a story setting. Like, like he would have had some moment with these dudes, and he did have it with Smitty, but
But I think from that perspective, it's hard, because I think if the critique, you have to maintain the consistency then of the critique of, like, that's an interesting point that this person made, that if they would have put some of this stuff in, that people would have been like, that didn't happen. But then they'll laugh at like, oh, he's like diving through this underground bunker and like dodging Japanese guys and whatever, and it's just like, that seems incongruous then, to be like upset that it's like, well, they like, you know, didn't show it in a realistic way, but then it's like, oh, but they like didn't put everything in it, but then those things would have made people almost.
I think it wasn't so much that the scenes with the Japanese was unrealistic. It just, the way that they showed it, not the way that they told it. In a sense, it just felt like the way that they kept jumping to different scenes, and I could see what they were trying to do. It just felt like the way that they were framing the actual scene itself, like I was supposed to find this like comedic rather than tense. Or like when he's hiding under that guy's body, like that seemed like it should have been a horrifying moment. Like, you just had to bury some dude under the dirt that you were trying to save, and then hide under a dead body and hope the Japanese people wouldn't kill you. But then it's just like one of those comedic moments in a movie where like you're like hiding there, and then you can see the little eyeball, and then the Japanese are like standing right over you talking and chatting. Like, just the way that the scene happened itself, it wasn't that it was unbelievable. It just felt like I was supposed to find it comedic. Yeah. Like, it didn't seem like it was framed in a way that was like scary.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Or like stories you hear about the Holocaust where people have to like hide under dead bodies to survive. Like, it didn't feel like that kind of moment. I don't know. I'm going to drop this one because I subjectively that was one of my favorite moments in the movie. Really? And I was absolutely horrified. And again, it's like, I know he's going to get out of this, but I think, again, diving into the headspace of Desmond Doss in that moment, if this is a real moment that happened, that he's saving this guy and he had to bury him in the dirt and he had to whatever, like, he leaves like one eye open, like one eye for this guy. And I think just like it's open enough and it's unburied enough that it's not just like a guy just like scanning left to right. It's like you can see like the little jitters, and you can see like the communication from the human face in like, you know, 3/4 of three little quarters size. You can see all the emotion in this guy's face of like, he's gonna die, he's buried in the dirt, there's this crazy ass medic who's laying next to him with a dead body on top of him, staring him in the face, trying to pretend like he's dead, and they're communicating to each other with their vision like, don't frickin' breathe, like don't do anything, like just don't move. And then the guy like stabs in him, and you know, again, like I could see that as being like, oh, like, you know, gotta make sure, and it's like, oh, he got lucky, but it was something of like, I can't again imagine that moment of literally laying next to this guy I'm trying to save, having the enemy ready to kill us both, and having to rely on just staring at this guy's face and like completely non-verbally
to like communicate, don't do it, don't move, don't breathe, don't whatever. And then as soon as the coast is clear and the guy's off, just bodies off, grab this guy, get the heck out of there. So I think that's how I experienced it. And I think if you felt it was comedic, like I can't argue through that, because I could see from a couple's perspective of if it's just like, you know, like, oh, here comes the bad guys, you know. But I think for me, it was a tense moment of like, that's probably very realistic, and that's probably something.
Yeah, and I got the sense that all of the little sequences they created were actually things that he told, and like, this is what happened to me. Like, I had to hide under a dead body, and like some dude stabbed a bayonet that just barely missed me, and like I had to bury this dude in dirt. Like, that's probably something he really did. I think it's just the way that they like strung all those things together. It felt like it was more. To me, it felt more comedic rather than tense. So, and I know what I like in my mind. I knew what I was supposed to be feeling.
Sure,
I knew that like this is real stuff that really happened to him. He's in the middle of war. He's running from the Japanese. Like, I don't know what it is about how they framed it. It just felt like they were making like some other type of movie. Like I said, like a movie where you're like being like a Scooby-Doo thing or something, like where you're being chased by the bad guys and like you're hiding around corners and different things.
This is super fascinating because I did not feel any of this. Yeah. Like I was the complete antithesis. Like I was so into this movie from like start to finish, and I don't know what it was. Like and
that was the only part of the movie where I really felt like that.
Yeah.
Because everything else, like the war scenes where he's like just in a daze and he's hopping from foxhole to foxhole and like seeing all these people die and legs getting blown off and people groaning on the ground and stuff, and it's just horrifying. And for some reason, once it gets to the sequence where he's like saving these people, I just found it to be comedic. I don't know why.
Sure.
Maybe because it's so like, maybe because it just feels so unrealistic, even though it is real. And like you said, it's like that weird incongruity between like, this is real stuff that actually happened, and it still just seems so unbelievable that it happened like this. And maybe my mind is trying to reconcile that. Like,
sure.
Because I did get the sense that like in that little part where he's on the cliff by himself, like those were real stories that he told, probably.
Yeah.
And so they took all those stories and they created this scene out of them. And because it's just so unbelievable that he somehow survived to save 75 people
in all these crazy ways,
it's like almost comedic in a way of like, this is unbelievable. Like I don't know how to even feel in this moment. Yeah. Like, and you know what I mean? And maybe that's why we're having different reactions to it. Sure. Because to me, it's just like so unbelievable that it was like kind of funny, in a weird way, in like a really dark comedic way.
Kind of like when you land one of those crazy things in a game, or you see one of those things that's like a once in a lifetime event, and you just can't help but laugh. Because I think maybe that's like just a difference in terms that I think I empathize a little deeper. Is it's not humor of like, oh, it was literally funny, like it was like a funny scene. It was more just like, I literally can't believe this. Like, I can't believe that this dude just did this, and he's laying, like
it's too good to be true.
It's like, that's interesting.
And I think maybe that was the scene that finally pulled me out of it to wrestle with this is the real part. This is the part that he probably tells. Like, these are probably the stories he's told people since like the 50s and stuff. And like, the most unbelievable part of what he's done is like almost like comedic because it's so unbelievable.
It's like you can't. There's no way.
Like it's hard to reconcile in my mind. Like how you like you just went through this whole thing where people were getting blown up and killed by the Japanese and like all this crazy stuff, and somehow you just survived long enough, like almost a 24-hour period, and you saved 75 people's lives alone, and you shimmied them down this cliff, which I think in real life the cliff wasn't that large, but still, like, how did you evade? Like, it's just so like, to me, it's just funny because, like, how did you survive? Yeah. Like, how did you evade? And it's like, there's really no explanation.
For sure.
The only explanation is, like, his faith is actually what got him through it somehow. And not even that, like, God saved those people, but it's more like the only reason he had strength was because of his conviction to keep going. And he kept praying after everything, like, just give me one more. Just give me one more. And, like, 75 later, and his hands are all raw from the rope, and, like, the last one where he just like ties the dude to him and jumps off the cliff. I'm just like, this is like it's just funny to me. I don't know why. It's not like I was sitting there laughing at it, but it was more just like, this is so unbelievable.
Oh my gosh.
This is hilarious in a way. I don't know.
Like my brain
it feels weird to be laughing at something that was like real, but it's just like his story is so crazy that like you can't help but just be like, this is nuts.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what I'm feeling.
No,
it's like it's less
that
of
makes
like
a lot of sense.
this dude like it's more of like this is just nuts.
Yeah. No, I think that helps clarify.
And maybe that's why I was like finding it comedic is like for you it was more of just like you felt like what he was probably feeling in those scenes, and I felt like I can't even get into these scenes because it's just so beyond what I can comprehend that it's almost comedic. You know?
How much of your personal self did you reflect onto Desmond Doss when you watched it? That might be an abstract question, but
I don't know.
How much did you put yourself in his shoes? Like you yourself, Phil, and your brain into like.
I don't think I could get into his shoes. I think I disagreed with him fundamentally from the beginning.
Sure.
Like I got what he was trying to do, but
let me clarify, because I think like that's a good point, but I think because I'm not saying I was like, oh, what if I was a guns rights activist and like went to war, but more saying being a man that is so driven by his conviction, no matter how abused and oppressed he was by these people trying to get him out and to do these things, to stand up under it, to fight through to the bitter end, to save 75 frickin' dudes in this war, clinging to more or less like one phrase and one
I think because of his ability and his strength to like do things against all odds, I like couldn't put myself in his shoes because it was like I would have given up immediately. Like I would have I would like in that moment where he has that crisis of like, what am I supposed to do here? Like I would have just climbed down the cliff. Like I don't think I would have had the courage that he had to do what he did. Like I don't think most people have that level of. I don't think most people have that ability, which is why people are telling this story, because it's like, who does this? Who risks their life to save 75 people?
Yeah.
Like everybody at the bottom of the cliff, none of those people stayed and did anything. Like none of them wanted to go back up and help. Like, but he was already up there just dropping people down, and they're like, what the heck is going on up there? Mm-hmm. And I don't think I would have been that person, if I'm being honest. And I think maybe that is why I had a hard time being in his shoes, and why it was so like unbelievable in a sense that it's just really hard to put myself in that spot. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No. And I think that's good. And I to be honest, like that, I wholeheartedly agree. Like I think that's why I kept crying throughout the movie is seeing this guy who was so, I think in the majority of fiction, we see ourselves as Superman. We see ourselves as the hero. We see ourselves as the bringer of justice and making the world right. And I think if we were truly honest with ourselves as individuals, we are more akin to either the bystander who's running away in terror as buildings are falling, or we're more akin to sometimes even the villain, maybe, who's trying to destroy the world or take something that they think that they're owed or whatever. And I think this was like a real... And I think in those instances, it's like, oh, wow. And it like comes and fades. It's like, oh, like that was a little part of Superman that I resonate with. And so I feel like I'm Superman. And I think to have this movie be an actual guy who lived and to feel like, what am I doing with my life? Like, and not in a way of like, oh, this movie was, and I don't want to phrase that in a way that makes this movie sound like it was preachy of like, wake up millennials, like get to it. But it was just legitimately like, what am I doing? Like this guy was so driven by what he did and what he believed, which I share, not to the same intricacies, but in the general overall thing. Like this guy believed the same thing. I would have bawled on the cliff and I maybe would have shot myself. Like that was what I was feeling. And so I think there was these moments where like he's up there in this like spiritual existential crisis, like watching all these guys climb down, literally being like, I either need to climb down or run out of the field and maybe die and lose everything. And I was like, in that moment, I would have either climbed down and just counted my losses and been over with it, or I would have shot myself, because I was like, I cannot imagine being in that hellscape and having the fortitude, which again, and I mean like, I'm I'm being careful not to be preachy because we don't bring our personal beliefs into this all the time, but just being frank of like, this is not something that your average, like, you know, whatever multi-million-dollar mogul and his like self-made billionaires, like, he's not the guy at the top of frickin' Hacksaw Ridge running out into the battlefield when there's guys with guns trying to kill him. He's not. I don't care how self-made or how big he is. He's not that guy. So what the hell in him made him keep doing that? And if he was able to sustain himself off of just one frickin' sentence, give me another one, and the beliefs and everything behind that, it wrecks me inside, and it blows my mind of like, do I not really understand fully like what life could be, or like what the world truly is like on a momentous scale, that this guy lived this and he survived, and even after he survived, his heart was not bitter towards the army. His heart was not bitter towards the guys who tormented him. He saved the dude who made his life hell. Like, there's so many layers of like, this is not just a guy who was like a pacifist and was a super nice hippie and just like, you know, I kind of want to do a certain level of it, but I'm not going to do all of it. Like, there was something unworldly in this guy that he did not. And so I think that was the part that made me burst into tears, is it's like, I can't even imagine having that level of fortitude on all the different planes of physical, emotional, spiritual, mental, whatever. Like, I can't imagine that. And so to think that this guy did this is sobering bananas and humorous. Like, it's exactly like you said. I think I took it, and sorry to get all ramped up, I think like I'm like, I joked like when we started, I literally am 20 minutes off this movie, and I think there's so many things, and it's Sunday and it's post church, and I was like, all right, I gotta run home and watch Hacksaw Ridge, and then I get ruined, and I'm like, oh gosh, like, this is nuts. But I think there was a real level personally of like, man, like, none of us are this dude, and this is a once in a lifetime dude, but I just found it interesting, all the things that went into who he was and his character. Like, that is a guy who at his core believes something and will live that out in consistency.
And I think the other interesting part about the movie is war films tend to be about the heroism of like soldiers in general, which I'm not trying to discount, because like anybody who was willing to sign up for World War I or World War II, like, I don't even know if I would have had the guts to do it, but this movie is a contrast to that of like, most movies are just celebrating people willing to sacrifice their lives for a greater cause or for the nation or whatever, and whatever opinion you have about those messages. But this movie was about a guy who was willing to do that, but also he saved tons of people despite not killing anybody. And it's just an interesting contrast to the traditional message of heroism and patriotism and different thing. It kind of it adds a different voice into the mix, I think, that we don't hear a lot. And I think, I don't know, it's just fascinating. Because there's so many stories out there of heroism and different things, and we have all these superhero movies now of just like crazy stories about the hero coming into his own, and you get this very real one about, like you said, a once in a lifetime person where you're just like, I just can't believe this. It's just insane. Like, the fact that like just the scenes where he comes into the hospital and like he sees the one guy and then he sees the entire hospital all just like looking at him like he's a hero. And I don't know if that actually happened. I'm assuming it did. And it's just, that was one of the parts that hit me. I was like, these are all of the people who would have died if he had climbed down that hill.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
All of these people would be dead, because they said like, how many people we got, and he's like, oh, we only got like 38, and there's like 100 or so left up at the top of the hill, and he saved 75 of them. Like, that's nuts. Those people would have been dead. Like, they were still alive, and they would have had to sit up there, and the Japanese would have killed them eventually. And like, he comes into the hospital, and all these people he saved are laying there like, how do I even thank this person? Like, they just looked at him like he was a hero, basically. And he was still able to face that with humility, it seemed. And in real life, people were saying like, even throughout the years, like, he's never lost that sense of humility and never felt like it was really him who did it. It was God or whatever.
I think the ending quote that he said is, he was like, the true heroes are the ones that aren't with us anymore. And like that's just a crazy. And again, because I think in our hearts we see someone of this caliber and this character, and we're like, there are people who parade themselves and how amazing they are on less. And so for this guy and his character to maintain his whole life on that conviction of like, no, like, these men who gave their lives are the ones who are the heroes. Even though he saved all these people and he did this miraculous feat, he has a grand scale view of the entirety of not just his life, but everyone's lives that went into
the implications and
saving the modern age as we know it. Literally, you know, like, world is a very different place if we lose World War II. You know, it's just what it is.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
it's interesting.
Yeah,
I think it was a good story. It was a different take on heroism than we traditionally have.
Definitely.
So,
for sure.
And even that one scene where he like helps the Japanese guy. I don't know. I'm assuming he just like gave him morphine so he could die more in peace or something. I don't know what happened in that scene, but it was interesting. Apparently, in real life, or in the movie, they even said
there was a couple.
They dropped some Japanese down, which it sounded like they just let him die. But I was like, oh, that kind of sucks. But it was interesting to me that he was willing to save Japanese people, even if other people weren't. And so it's kind of an interesting contrast to that war. And World War II is just messy in general, and as with any war. But it's just interesting to see somebody display that level of. It's just so far beyond what any of us are truly capable of. I think, like it's hard to reconcile or hard to grapple with.
Definitely,
so,
yeah, definitely.
I don't know if I have any other thoughts on it.
I honestly don't either, and we're kind of at the hour mark, so I don't think we need to drag it out much farther. But I mean,
I'd recommend it. I think it's a good movie, and if you're not a fan of like blood, guts, and gore, like
don't watch this.
This movie's got legs flying off and people cut in half, being dragged across the dirt, and like
it's rough.
There's a lot of very gruesome depictions of war, which are probably realistic. So
definitely, I recommend it on just it's an incredible story, and I think just people need to check into Desmond Doss and his whole life.
We need more true stories about true heroes.
Yep. Yeah, because I think it's so easy. Like we joked, like it's so easy to get caught up in the fictional heroes that we love and stuff like that, and not that we need to like, build all these crazy edifices, whether through media or through whatever, or personal quote unquote worship, but of these other people, but just remembering that there was a life and there was an existence and there was a history behind us that was hellish, that people our age, as 20 somethings had to go through, that we, Lord willing, will never have to experience to the capacity that they did. And so I think I think for me, what made this movie amazing, and it's probably up there as one of my favorite movies ever, I think, of just not this film itself inherently, but I think just the as a 24-year-old having experienced different stages of life, and like, having a wife and thinking of like Desmond, who got married literally right before leave and then went off. Like that's hard. I can't imagine that. And not of like, oh, I'm going to Europe for a business trip for a while. Like I could not come home. I could die. And to think of all the times that he put himself on the line because of his faith and because of what he believed, and the consistency of his conviction, even if people vehemently disagreed on a number of different levels, I think it was just such a poetic and such a beautiful life lived in a very, very horrifying time. It was a life of redemption in that. And so I think that just so many layers that I could gush about, that I think it just was like, this was a powerful movie to me. But that's the gist. So definitely. I don't know if I have anything out. So, all right, cool. Well, that was a pretty action-packed, charged discussion. I appreciate that. That was a lot of fun.
That was fun.
So, because I know we were both like, how the heck are we going to talk about this? Because there's so much to unpack.
There's so many different levels. Like the story itself, the movie in a general sense, and it's hard to parse those two things apart. So it was good talk.
Awesome. Cool. Well, as a reminder, as Phil shared in the beginning, popculturepunks.com, the place for all your pop culture goods. If you want to check out the most recent Pop Culture Rex blog post, you can go to popculturepunks.com/writing. It should be one of the very first posts that shows up. We are Amazon affiliates, so you might notice that there are some clickable links in there. Those are links that will send you to the items that we are recommending. If you purchase those items through those links, we get a little bit of a cut. So if you're interested in getting those things, we'd super appreciate if you picked them up through those links, because that helps support the show. If not, definitely check those things out anyway, wherever you find them. That's that recommendation. Katana Zero, Rage 2, Punks Plays on YouTube. You can check those out if you're looking for a little media fun. And next week will be a pre-recorded episode because we will be out of town and every which way. And that will be storytelling and God of War. So a lot of storytelling episodes this month so far. That was a fun talk because I think I had just beaten it, and I know that was, you'd expressed in the past that was one of your favorite games ever. And so I think it's a good time. So, and with that, this has been a narrative / history / life discussion of Hacksaw Ridge, featuring the true story of Desmond Doss. I also forgot that this is going up a little bit before July 4th, but thank you to our veterans who are serving, have served, remembering those that we have lost to preserve the freedom in the United States. For whatever your party, whatever your conviction, right, left, or otherwise, we are super significant. We are super blessed to live in this country, and we should remember that on July 4th as we're throwing bottle rockets at each other and setting off fireworks and grilling burgers. Yeah. So, thank a veteran. Remember the people who have fallen to preserve our nation and to make the world a better place. With that, we bid you all a bond fowabunga. We bid you all a fond cowabunga.